For most of his career, Oliver Tree wanted you to doubt him. That was the whole design. The bowl cut, the oversized suits, the scooter, the retirement he announced with nearly every record he ever released. "This is the last one, I'm done, goodbye," only to come back months later with another album and another alter ego. He built a 10-year career on the idea that nothing he said could quite be trusted, that the joke might still be loading, that the punchline was always one beat away. He was the Guinness World Record holder for the world's largest rideable scooter. He was the artist who collaborated with KSI, Robin Schulz, and Diplo. He made Life Goes On and Miss You and Alien Boy, records that hid genuine feeling inside elaborate absurdity. And he did all of it under Atlantic Records, a label he would later publicly feud with, right up until the end. So when the news came on the morning of June 14, 2026, a strange thing happened. A lot of people refused to believe it. They had been trained not to. For years, the safest assumption about an Oliver Tree headline was that it was a bit. A faked death felt less like a tragedy and more like a Tuesday. Across his comment sections and group chats, the same sentence kept appearing in different words. "This has to be a stunt." It wasn't. 2 helicopters had collided in the sky over Rio de Janeiro. 6 people were gone. And the man who spent a decade teaching the internet to disbelieve him had, this time, told no joke at all. This is the part of the story the first headlines didn't have room for. What actually happened in Brazil, what he had said about his own death just 2 months earlier in an interview almost nobody noticed at the time, and the quietest, hardest detail of all, that when the world turned to his life and asked the people closest to him to speak, almost no one did. Almost. One voice spoke. "We'll get to her. The facts first, because the facts deserve to be said plainly." On the morning of Sunday, June 14, 2026, just before 9 o'clock local time, 2 helicopters collided in midair over the Recreio dos Bandeirantes neighborhood in the western zone of Rio de Janeiro. One aircraft was carrying 5 people, the other carried only its pilot. There were no survivors. All 6 aboard the 2 helicopters were killed. One of the helicopters came down into the parking lot of a car dealership where a row of electric vehicles was stored. The impact set off a fire. Because of the lithium batteries in those vehicles, the blaze burned hotter and longer than an ordinary car fire, releasing toxic smoke and forcing crews to use several times the water they'd normally need. Around 20 vehicles were caught in the flames. Roughly 45 personnel responded. By mid-morning, the fire was under control, and what remained was the slow, grim work of understanding who had been lost. The victims were named in the days that followed. Oliver Tree Nickel, the American singer, 32 years old. Gaspar Prim, a 23-year-old content creator from Argentina known online as Gaspi, with a following in the millions across Latin America and Spain. A Brazilian music producer, an Argentine director, and the 2 pilots. Several of them had been traveling together by all accounts to film something. Cameras and equipment were recovered from the wreckage. What exactly they were making has never been confirmed. Oliver's father, Jesse Nickel, confirmed his son's death to NBC News. The family had learned of it, he said, from a producer in Brazil who had been working on music with Oliver. His message was short. "Peace be with Oliver," he wrote, and asked for privacy. There was nothing more to say, and he did not try to say it. The cause of the collision is still under investigation. Brazil's ANAC, the National Civil Aviation Authority, and the civil police opened parallel inquiries. Early on, investigators raised the possibility of human error and said they were working to determine whether responsibility lay with a pilot or with air traffic control. As of this recording, that remains an open question, not a conclusion. It is worth saying clearly, because in a story like this, the rumors always outrun the report. And there is one more detail from those first days that we feel should be handled gently rather than skipped. In the immediate aftermath, 5 of the 6 victims were formally identified. Oliver was not at first. The damage from the fire was severe enough that authorities turned to dental records and then to DNA to confirm what everyone already feared. For a brief, terrible window, a family that already knew its son was gone still had to wait for a laboratory to say his name. That is the kind of waiting that doesn't make the highlight real. It is also the truest measure of how real this was. To understand why his death landed the way it did, the disbelief, the surely this is a bit, you have to understand what kind of artist Oliver Tree actually was. He was born Oliver Tree Nickel on June 29, 1993 in Santa Cruz, California. The detail people always reach for is that his parents had worked as traveling circus performers, and that the early years of his life were spent partly in a motorhome before the family settled on the California coast. It's a tidy origin story for a man who would grow up to turn his entire public life into a kind of traveling show. But the truth is, he was a serious musician long before he was a character. As a teenager, he made electronic music, dubstep, bass, the heavy stuff, under other names. He played in a local ska band. He put out an EP in his late teens that caught the ear of people who knew what they were listening to, including, by one account, Thom Yorke of Radiohead. He studied, he produced, he kept working. Then in 2016, a feature he sang on, produced with Whethan, went viral, and the door to a record deal opened. What he did with that door is the interesting part. Most artists handed a major label contract, sand themselves down into something palatable. Oliver did the opposite. He invented Oliver Tree, the version of himself with the bowl cut and the windbreakers 2 sizes too big, the man who rode a scooter into every situation and treated sincerity and satire as the same instrument. It was a costume, and he knew it was a costume, and he never once pretended otherwise. The records came with the persona. His debut album, Ugly is Beautiful, in 2020 landed in the upper reaches of the Billboard 200 and gave him Alien Boy and Life Goes On, the song that would eventually become his most emotionally enduring work. There was a Guinness World Record for a comically enormous scooter. Then came Cowboy Tears, recorded with Travis Barker behind the boards on several tracks, followed by Alone in a Crowd and Love You Madly, Hate You Badly, more alter egos with each one. A fake cowboy for one record, a different invented man for the next. He collaborated with Little Big, the Russian collective, on a chaotic EP that felt made specifically for people who needed to laugh at something. There was a song with Robin Schulz, a German producer, called Miss You that climbed the UK charts and earned him a Brit Award nomination. By the time he died, he had tens of millions of listeners, billions of video views, and a real deep catalog hiding underneath all the clowning. And running through all of it, like a thread he could never quite stop pulling, was the bit about endings. He announced his retirement again and again. This is the last record. He staged exits. He played dead, in a manner of speaking, more than once. Not literally faking his own funeral to the press, but building a public persona where vanishing and returning was part of the act. He trained his audience deliberately to never take his goodbye at face value. He could not have known what that training would cost them on June 14th. 2 months before he died, Oliver Tree sat down on the Zach Sang Show, an interview to promote his 4th album, and he started talking about his will. Not as a morbid aside, in detail. He explained that he didn't believe the money he'd made was really his, that he took, in his words, no credit for any of it, and that none of the wealth felt like something he owned. So he had arranged things, he said, for the moment he was gone. When he died, his family wasn't getting a penny, a future wife, hypothetical future kids, not a penny either beyond getting his children through college. That, he said, was the agreement. Instead, the money would go to a foundation he had set up called Dr. Oliver's Art Grants for Baby Geniuses, designed to fund other artists. Specifically, the physical act of making art, the renting of equipment, and the hiring of people. Money pushed toward creation rather than locked in an estate. It would be easy to read all of this as another piece of performance. With Oliver, it usually was. But there was one line in that conversation that has not stopped echoing since the news broke. He talked about how people would finally come around to his strange videos and his strange songs. And then he said the quiet truth underneath every artist's career. That appreciation tends to arrive late, that you get your due, he suggested, when you're not there anymore. He said it almost casually, the way you say something you've made peace with. 2 months later, it stopped being an observation and became a prophecy. In the days after his death, his most tender song re-entered the global streaming charts on the strength of grieving fans alone. No marketing, no label push, just hundreds of thousands of people playing Life Goes On because they didn't know what else to do with their hands. He had told us this would happen. We just assumed, as always, that he was kidding. Here is where this story turns, and where it gets genuinely revealing. Not because of what was said, but because of how little was. When a public figure dies young, there is a familiar choreography to the grief. Ex's post, current partner's post. The people who shared his bed and his years step into the light and offer the world a window. We have come to expect it. We almost demand it. With Oliver Tree, that choreography mostly didn't happen. And the reason it didn't is its own kind of portrait. Start with the documented facts, because rumor loves a vacuum, and we're not going to feed it. At the time of his death, Oliver Tree was not married. He had no wife. He had no publicly known girlfriend, no fiancé, no partner who stepped forward as his partner. Reputable reporting after his death confirmed this plainly. The man who turned his entire existence into public spectacle had, in the one area most celebrities can't help but broadcast, gone almost completely dark. It wasn't that he never spoke about it. Years earlier, on a podcast, he described his romantic life in loose terms, said the touring life made a steady relationship nearly impossible, that he didn't really live anywhere, and that he'd been exploring something more open than monogamy. He named no one. He kept the details where he kept most of the real things in his life, behind the costume, which brings us to the one relationship that was real, documented, and public. And to the one person who, when he died, actually spoke. Oliver Tree dated the singer Melanie Martinez. They came together in 2019 in the most fitting way imaginable for two artists. She interviewed him, guest editing a magazine issue, and the professional became personal. They were together into 2020. When it ended quietly and, by every account from both of them, amicably. They unfollowed, they deleted the photos, they moved on. There was no scandal, there was no war. What came after the breakup is the part that actually matters, because it tells you something about who he was when the cameras weren't the point. In the years that followed, Martinez released new music, and a portion of her fan base decided some of those songs were secret attacks on Oliver. They weren't, she said so directly. But the speculation curdled into harassment, and a wave of her fans turned on him online. Martinez did something that not every artist does in that situation. She publicly told them to stop. She said plainly that the two of them had ended things mutually, that they were on good terms, and that he should be left alone. It didn't entirely work. Oliver later admitted in a 2023 interview that the whole ordeal had genuinely worn him down, that it had made him depressed. He didn't lash out. He didn't turn it into a bit. For once, he just told the truth about how it felt. Two people who had quietly chosen to stay decent to each other, caught in a storm neither of them wanted, both trying to wave it off. That is the context you need for what she wrote the day he died. On June 14th, hours after the news broke, Melanie Martinez posted a tribute to her Instagram story alongside a photo of the two of them from when they were together. She didn't perform her grief, and she didn't tidy it up. She wrote, in essence, that she had been a wreck all day, that it was almost impossible to understand how someone who had shared such a specific, formative stretch of your life could simply be gone. She wrote about his dedication to his art, about how easily he sparked laughter and joy in the people around him, about a laugh she described as warm and contagious. She wrote about a softness in him, a childlike sense of wonder that lived right alongside his drive to create. And then she said goodbye in the only language that fit a man like him. She told him to rest in peace, and said she knew he was up there making the angels giggle. She said she'd be left wondering what stunt, what creative project he was already scheming up in heaven. That line is the whole relationship in a sentence. She had been with him. She knew exactly what he was, and even in the worst hour, she reached past the grief for the joke he would have wanted. Because loving Oliver Tree meant understanding that the bit and the sincerity were never separate things. They were the same thing, they always had been. Hers was the only voice from his romantic life that spoke. No other ex came forward. No partner emerged from the wings. And rather than fill that silence with invention, rather than manufacture a grieving girlfriend the tabloids would love, the honest thing, the only thing, is to sit with what the silence actually says. Oliver Tree gave the world everything except this. He let us see the scooter and the suits and the stunts and the fake retirements. He kept his heart almost entirely for himself. When he died, there was simply no one standing in that private room to turn on the lights, except the woman he'd parted with on good terms half a decade before, who picked up her phone and, through her own tears, made him a joke one last time. If his romantic life stayed quiet, the rest of his world did not. Once the disbelief broke, the tributes came in a flood, and they came from a strikingly wide range of people, which is its own argument for how much he was loved by those who actually knew him. Logan Paul, who had hosted him and called him one of his favorite people, said he was still in denial, that he was gutted, that he wanted to believe Oliver was simply off on his next adventure somewhere in the universe. He named the others lost in the crash alongside him, refusing to let his friend be mourned in isolation. The British creator and musician KSI, who had made music with him, wrote that he couldn't believe he was even typing the words. "You should still be here," he said. 32 years old, with so much life and so much music still ahead. He said it didn't feel real. A lot of people said that. It was the phrase of the week. The rapper BBNOs called him an inspiration and said his heart was shattered, and told people to hold their friends and family close. The comedian Whitney Cummings, sharing a photo of the two of them mid-hug, called him one of the most talented people on earth. And then she said the thing that everyone who met him seemed to feel compelled to clarify, that the talent didn't come with the ego that usually rides shotgun, that he was, somehow, pure. Diplo admitted he kept hoping the whole thing was some impossibly elaborate way to drop a new song, because it couldn't be true. Kid Cudi said he'd spoken to him just weeks before. The list ran long. Musicians, comedians, streamers, an Argentine broadcaster mourning Gatsby in the same breath, a government office in Rio posting its condolences, his label, Atlantic Records, the one he'd publicly feuded with only 2 months earlier, set the conflict aside and called him a true original, endlessly inventive, thoroughly his own. And back home in Santa Cruz, the marquee of a local theater spelled out a simple, slightly misspelled goodbye, the kind a hometown writes for someone it watched grow up. "You will be missed." There is something worth noticing in that chorus. Almost everyone reached, instinctively, for the same two ideas: that he was impossibly talented, and that he was, underneath the troll and the costume, genuinely kind. Those are not the two things people usually say about a professional provocateur. They are the things people say about someone whose whole act was a way of protecting something soft. No story about Oliver Tree's death would be complete without the detail that turned the internet inside out in the days that followed. And it requires a steady hand, because it is exactly the kind of thing that gets twisted. One of his music videos features him standing on a staircase between two helicopters. In it, he wears a pilot's uniform, and he sings a line about flowers on his tombstone, about being hated until the day he's dead. After June 14th, that video resurfaced and exploded. Hundreds of thousands of fresh views, people pausing on the frame with the two aircraft, calling it eerie, calling it a premonition, calling it proof of something. Here is the responsible way to hold that. It is a genuine, strange coincidence, and there is no shame in feeling a chill at it. Oliver Tree made art that flirted constantly with death, vanishing, and rebirth. It was one of his central obsessions, going back to a teenage story he sometimes told about watching his own funeral in a vision and feeling reborn. He circled mortality for his entire career. When a man builds a decade of work around that theme, some of that work is going to look prophetic the moment the worst happens. That is the nature of obsession, not evidence of foresight, and it must be said just as firmly. The darker theories that bloomed alongside the grief, that the death was faked, that there was a body double, that this was the ultimate stunt, have no support from any credible source. They are the toxic residue of the very disbelief he spent 10 years cultivating. He taught the world not to trust his goodbyes. And so, when the real one came, a corner of the internet couldn't accept it. That is a tragedy folded inside a tragedy. The helicopters were real, the fire was real, his father's grief was real. There is no twist coming. This time, the stunt was just the truth. So what do we do with a life like this? Oliver Tree spent his career as a paradox you weren't supposed to solve. He was a serious musician dressed as a clown, a sincere heart hidden behind a troll, a man who told the truth most clearly when he was pretending to joke. He made you doubt him on purpose, and the cruelest irony of his ending is that the doubt outlived him, that his final genuine exit was met by some with the same shrug he'd spent 10 years earning. But look at what actually remains. A father asking for peace in 7 plain words. An ex-girlfriend, years past their relationship and decent to him through all of it, reaching past her own grief to imagine him making the angels laugh. A flood of people who knew him insisting almost in unison that the kindest thing about him was the realest thing about him. And a song, a quiet one, about life going on, climbing back up the charts because hundreds of thousands of strangers needed somewhere to put their grief. He told an interviewer that people appreciate you when you're no longer there. He was right. He was usually right, underneath the bit. The appreciation he predicted arrived exactly on schedule, riding in on the worst possible vehicle. The character he built, the bowl cut, the scooter, the windbreakers, the endless fake goodbyes, that was always a structure he put up around something he didn't want the world to touch. We can see it more clearly now in the shape of the silence he left behind. He gave us everything except his heart and kept that for the very few. One of them spoke for all of us when she said goodbye. Rest easy, Oliver. Whatever you're scheming up next, we'll be here, still wondering.